Well, I appreciate the bill organizers for inviting me over. I'm from San Francisco, and I've been in media all my life. And in 2009, I launched a community news network called the Breaking News Network, with the philosophy and concept that local news should be a community service that gives voice to both traditional news media and community newsmakers via social media. So over the past 5 years, the Breaking News Network has become the most comprehensive source for local news in 400 cities worldwide. Local news networks are very hard to build, and AOL, Gannett, and other news publishers have tried and actually aborted their efforts over the past 5 years. There's a reason for it. The economies of building local news is very difficult because hiring local reporters, hiring a sales staff to sell advertisements to small businesses who can't even afford their advertising rates is not a sustainable business model. So what I wanted to do is explain how the three principles of how I was able to build a localized news network over the past 5 years and how I made it sustainable. And the three principles involved are these, and they buck the traditional news media model. The first is the curation of content. And so across 400 cities, we curate the best media and blog feeds from independent news publishers, and while providing full attribution to those publishers and providing traffic to them, so we link directly to those publishers. The second principle is that we are community inclusive, and what we do is we give voices to community newsmakers, which include mayors and city politicians, civic groups, performing arts organizations, and nonprofits and good causes, so that they have a voice through the network. And then the third principle is no advertising. Advertising is actually a divisive business model that nobody, whether it's the news consumer or even the publisher, really likes. You know, pressing and pushing ads to the small business community, it just doesn't make sense. And it's almost a recipe for disaster when, mass media tries to do that. And a good example of the problems of local news today is really exhibited in the LA Times iPhone app. And if you download the iPhone app for the LA Times, you'll see that they're trying to push lots of different kinds of advertising and content marketing, which are basically disguised advertisements sponsored by companies like FedEx that are actually not news, they're faux news. And so if you look at the iPhone app's reviews for the LA Times, 75% have given it a 1 star. So this is the real big problem with local news. And what I'm doing is I'm taking these three principles, which I actually, figured out kind of from day one of the network building, that curation really works because if you're curating really good content, people will love it and the cost is zero. And so you can actually sustain yourself because you've got great content, better content than any of the other local news. And the second principle, to make the community inclusivity, where you're pulling in and giving voice to community newsmakers, creates this engagement between those with the voice and the people that they're addressing their news to. And then, of course, the third thing, no one likes advertising. And once you get rid of that, people really, you're basically creating a goodwill engine. And so I'm taking these three principles and I'm developing these new news networks that are just this massive whole of new news networks across what I call topical news. So I'm going to explain what topical news is. I'm not getting into this slide yet, but I'm getting to it soon. Topical news is basically news that is underserved by the traditional local media. So the local news media is incomplete. They focus on traffic, weather, sports, crime, and car crashes for the most part. But the rest of it is underserved. So you can't, the challenge is finding localized news associated with social impact, the environment, homeless and poverty issues, gay rights, all of these localized niches actually, there's no business model associated with actually reporting these very narrow-cast, long-tail, esoteric subjects by news media. There's no reason because there's no business model attached to it. And so they really just focus on those top 5 issues. So I'm going to go through a laundry list of all the topical news that we want to make sure gets distributed to local readers. And if you are a writer, thinker, or doer that is associated with any of these 14 topics, you know, our mission is to get your voice out to the local, and I'll explain, to the national community of readers. So these are the 14 topics. In alphabetical order, it's arts and culture, civic sustainability and the sharing economy, education and personal development, the environment, climate change, and green tech, ethnic and cultural news, health and wellness, housing and affordability and real estate, LGBTQ, local food movement, including making sure that food is sustainable, local politics, social impact, solving the homeless and poverty and hunger across the world, startups, small business development, it's not only the tech startups, and women and girls. Those are the 14 subjects where we're developing topical news networks. So right now, topical news networks don't exist for those reasons that it doesn't have a business model. So I'm going to go to the chart now. There is a method to actually create a sustainable way of delivering topical news across those 14 subjects that I talked about. And what we do is we do the same thing that we did with the Breaking News Network. Use the same methodology of curating the best media and blog feeds so that people are introduced to really great content at a very localized level. And so we're using a curation strategy, and we're actually curating across 4 buckets of curated sources for localized syndication to the local reader base. And so the 4 buckets are these. The first set is that when we're developing topical news networks across, let's say, 100 cities, the national influencers, every topic has a set of them, and they are the must-reads. Yet, most people do not know who these national influencers are on, say, for example, the environment or green tech. For example, Alex Lightman, the keynote speaker, could actually be one of the national influencers and have his work exposed to a national audience in his work with sustainability in the environment and food. So we want to make sure that those national influencers are exposed to a local reader base because most local readers actually don't know who those national influencers are. The second set is that there is a set of national publishers across a topic. And so, for example, with the Black and racial sphere, there are a number of national publications like Cuddle Lines, The Root, and North Star News that actually publish, you know, articles on a national basis, and they have to publish on a national basis because they need to scale as much traffic and audience so that they can sustain their grants and fellowships and foundations to continue and sustain themselves. Now, the problem is that when Color Lines does a story that's based in Oakland or Detroit or Tucson, no one in Oakland, Detroit, or Tucson knows about that article because they don't know what Color Lines is. And so the thing that we need to do is we need to connect those national publications down to a local audience. And so you're parsing the articles by city, and you're able to drop down those articles by these national publications to a local reader base. And it's not just those 3 publications. There are hundreds of independent news publications that have the same quandary of trying to get their word out, but yet no one knows about them. And so if we parse all of them, and actually we do that through the Breaking News Network to drop their cities down to a localized level, this really helps develop their reach and also helps the news consumer to find out who these national publications are. The third bucket of curation is the local publishers. The local publishers do articles about, topical articles about, for example, the environment. They're in a certain sense ad hoc, but if you are able to aggregate all of the articles of a topical interest from local news publications, then that can actually be aggregated and presented. And then the fourth curated bucket is really important. It's the local bloggers, the nonprofits, the civic groups, and those community newsmakers that give them voice because they're not traditional media and they don't really have access to the news media environment. And so when you combine all of these curated sources, you actually are creating a 360-degree comprehensive viewpoint of local news across the cities that we're covering. And that's really important because if you try to find any kind of local news resource dealing with the Black community or the environment here in Los Angeles, it's very difficult to find. And so that's one of the solutions that I think are very important to make local news sustainable. And it just doesn't exist anywhere else. And no media companies are even doing this at this point. So we can go to the next slide. I'm just going to go over an example. And this is actually the curation of Black news. And we've done this. And this will be the 30-second example. But what I wanted to describe is who the national influencers are. You may not even recognize some of the names of these really prominent Black journalists. The publishers, you may not recognize those publishers as well, but they are very important. And the idea is that if you can get every single bit of local content specific to a city like San Francisco, LA, Washington, DC, Detroit, down to a local reader base, this is going to actually fill this massive hole for example, Black news in a community. And we can replicate this curation methodology across all of these 14 topics that I mentioned. The final piece that I wanted to really show is that by developing and giving voice to both traditional news media, and I'm saying the most interesting and best traditional news media, not what I'm going to call garbage news media that focuses on petty crime, car crashes, and fires, but the idea is that if you're able to give voice to traditional news media and community news media, those that do not have access to the media system, you actually start seeing that by giving media power to voices, let's say the Black community, where you can give these voices to the founders of people that are teaching Black girls to code, or foundation leaders who are actually trying to solve the poverty problems in inner cities, then you are able to actually empower them to create advocacy, and that's really important. So through a media strategy of giving media power, you can take a lot of these fragmented voices that have come up through that last channel, the local influencers, and in aggregate across 60, 100 cities, give them a platform and a forum to be able to advocate for campaigns, causes, even fundraise at a very national level. And that's actually one of the biggest missions that I have, is to make sure that all of these people have voices. And when they do, we call them advocate networks. We'll have advocate networks for the Black condition, advocate networks for the environment, and advocate networks for other topics. You can combine advocate networks too. Once we've developed advocate networks for the Black community, for the hunger situation, now you can actually combine advocate networks to support causes, for example, for feeding the hungry. Because feeding the hungry, you can actually pull in the media power of food banks, a lot of whom already use the network, the Breaking News Network, to get their messages out there in their communities. You can empower the Black community to support this. And then finally, one of the business models is that you can actually also get brands, food brands, even retail grocery brands to help support a Feed the Hungry initiative. And so that's the kind of the overlying real objective of developing a new wave of localized topical news networks. The final piece I want to really, I love this. I've only been to my first bill here, but I love the fact that all of these new ideas are being created. And if any of you have these new ideas and want the power of media to be able to disseminate and amplify this, I'm open to, finding ways of getting your message out on a national, on a local level, and also to work together with you in building these kinds of topical news networks. And so that's where I like to end off with. You can find me on Twitter, and I don't think it's on the slides, but it's in the program. My Twitter feed is P as in Patrick, Kitano. And any questions?